If anybody's watching from home, it'll take just a minute for the YouTube stream to catch up. But from here on out, anything that happens in the Jitsi meeting will be recorded in perpetuity.
All right.
Or as long as YouTube lasts.
Or, yeah. I mean, Google eventually kills all their services, right? So it's only a matter of time.
Oh, I still miss Google Reader.
Why you got to start the meeting on a sad note, Carl?
We'll end it on a good one.
Okay.
Well, when I was teaching at the University of Aberdeen, it's a 500-year-old university, so that some of that stuff in perpetuity meant they had to deal with agreements that they made in like 1702, or
Right.
there was a building they had to the Masons were using it for 300 years and they wouldn't leave.
Yeah.
So are we ready for introductions?
I think so. So, welcome to anybody watching on the live stream. This is our very first Neighbors United live stream meeting. So, if you have any technical difficulties throughout, hit up the chat. We'll be watching it, and let us know. Especially let us know if there's any audio or video problems. And we'll go around real quick and do some quick introductions. My name's Tim Friend. I live at the 200 block of New Holland Avenue, right at the corners between the cemetery and Triangle Park. Carl, you want to go next?
I'm Carl. Yeah, I'm Carl Feldman. I live on the 500 block of Reynolds Avenue, and I'm on the Neighbors United board as well.
My name is Alex King. I live on the 600 block of North Shippen, and I'm on the Neighbors United board.
Katie, you want to go next?
Yes, I'm Katie Chaffinch. I live on the 700 block of North Plum, and I just joined the board. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Steve?
Hi, Steve Garner, 200 block of East New Street, also proud board member.
Kendra?
Kendra Saunders, 100 block of East Clay Street, and I'm a new board member as well.
Andrew?
Hi, Andrew Whalen, and I'm on the 500 block of North Shippen Street, and I'm also a board member.
And our special guest tonight is Chris. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll queue up the program?
Yeah, hi there. I'm Chris Wendon. I'm the executive director for Advos. I don't actually live in the city, so I feel like kind of the odd one out here. I live just kind of not outside City, Marietta Avenue. And I have a weird accent. I'll get that out of the way first. I was born in the Southern Hemisphere, Sydney, Australia. My wife is a Lancaster County girl, and we have 2 adopted kids and 1 soon to be adopted. So that's my jam. That's my story.
Nice. So this meeting is kind of 2 major components. The first major component is we're going to be talking with Chris about a number of things, mostly related to good neighborly relations. And then we have some board business at the end. The board business is open to everybody. You're welcome to stay, but if it's totally boring to you, we also understand if you drop out as soon as Chris drops out. And without further adu, Carl, would you mind kind of walking us through the conversation with Chris?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. We're really glad that we could get together with Advos tonight to have I think, important and timely conversation about something that comes up all the time living in the city, any part of the city, I'm sure, which is dealing well with your neighbors and making sure that people can have productive relationships with the people that they have to be around all the time. Hopefully, best case scenario, these people become friends and you support each other. And but hopefully, worst case scenario, it's just something that you're able to manage okay, because sometimes it's not always like that. I think that the conversation is timely too, because something that is kind of a derivative of this relationship when it's not going well, or when there is some kind of issue in the neighborhood, is that a lot of people's first instinct may be to call the Lancaster City Police Department. And if you're in danger, someone is in danger, you should absolutely call the police department. That's what they're there to do. But I want to take some time tonight, aside from just trying to figure out how to have a good neighborly relationship, to also interrogate our thoughts about, what's making me feel like I'm kind of under threat at this moment, or why I need to bring in an external law enforcement entity to do something. All around the country, I think people are starting to take notice that maybe the way that we've constructed our society and enforcing the rules that we put on the books might not be proportionately allocated. Communities of color are often on the receiving end of some very difficult and potentially oppressive enforcement tactics. And I think, that can lead to distrust. And I think it's incumbent on us, as everyone on this call is our Caucasian males and females, to have that conversation with each other and with the other people that we know. So that's what I'm hoping to talk about tonight. Let's start with, I think, the building block of all this, though, which is good neighborly relations. So thank you, Chris. Could you take it away?
Yeah, thank you very much, Carl, and I appreciate the invitation. And whilst I don't live in the city for a good portion of my life, I have been either living in apartment complexes. Real quick, I have lived in many major capital cities. I've lived in Sydney, I've lived in Beijing, China, and I have lived on top of, next to, around, and had the joy of various fun and games with neighbors, and particularly challenging when you don't speak the same language as neighbors. So you kind of have to suck that one up when you're in Beijing, China, and you hear a whole bunch of noise above you, below you, around you, and beside you. But what I want to do, just kind of disarm the conversation, is share some of the ways that I have been a goofball when it comes to being a neighbor, and just realizing that I have also experienced some really silly things that I look back on now and say, did I really do that? The first thing I had was when I first got my job out of college. I had to find a place to live because I moved to a different part of Australia, and these friends kindly let me stay with them. And I stayed with them, and then what I didn't realize is that they had a goat, like a real live goat that was not on a leash kind of goat. So when you're kind of trying to move to a new city and you're staying with somebody, and then you come home one day and discover the goat ate your clothes, that's really kind of hard to have a conversation about. And add to that the fact that, yes, this was a stereotypical country house where you had to walk out the back of the house to go to another building to go to the bathroom. The goat was often either in the way of the bathroom in the middle of the night, or in the bathroom in the middle of the night. And so to kind of figure out how to have those conversations with not the neighbor, but the person I was living in, I didn't really do that well. I just kind of got up, packed up, and left. In my current housing environment, as I said, I have one little girl, and she just turned 2, and recently there was a spate of fireworks going off, and she would wake up and cry really badly. And believe it or not, my first reaction to my wife was, let's call the police so my daughter can go to sleep. And my wife looked at me and said, don't be a jerk. It's 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. Go and cuddle your daughter and just deal with it. Now, I share that to say that not all situations are that easy, but I want to kind of use that as the building block to say that as we have these conversations about how we handle neighborly conflict, sometimes it might take us taking a step back and looking at ourselves. And so what I wanted to do tonight is before we kind of talk about the whole policing situation, is talk you through a little bit of the skills that we use when we walk people through the idea of mediation. And so the mission of Advos really is to create a vibrant community, and we want to transform conflict through conversation. And the mission is that we transform conflict and we build community through face-to-face dialogue programs. And you'll see there that there are things that we want to do in the different dialogue methods. When harm occurs, we deal with that in the idea of restorative justice. When there is things that's occurring, we deal with a mediation and hopefully upstream to prevent conflicts from getting worse. We train people in some of the skills. And so what we're going to kind of talk about tonight is, as you see that screen, and hopefully those people who can see it, I'll share these, and I might send this to Carl, and Carl can send this out to folks if they can't see it. But when you stop and think about those conversations you've had that are full of conflict or go from 0 to 100 very easily, there are simple blocks, and I call them simple because we step back and look at them when we're cool, calm, and collected. They really are interesting blocks to listening. For instance, while we're listening to someone, we might be judging someone. When we are listening to someone, we might be putting them down in our subconscious or even our mind. We might be convincing ourselves that we're right. We might be actually not even listening to them. We might just be rehearsing what we're going to say when they've stopped yapping, if we're in a particularly heated conversation. And so there are many blocks that stop us from being good neighbors and stop us from being good communicators, not just in our neighborly situations, but maybe in our work situations, maybe in our family relationships. And so whatever it may be for you, there are blocks that stop us from listening, particularly when we feel like we have a particular issue and we feel like we're invested in it more than we like to admit. And so one of the keys to what we call conflict resolution is learning to identify the interests of each person. And what we want to do is try and shift from positions to interest, because it's crucial for us to be able to think through some solutions when we have to find creative solutions. You want the music down, I want the music up, neither of us are going to budge. What do we do? And so the reality is that we have to learn to try and shift from what we want to what interests may be. We're going to unpack that in just a moment. But when we talk about positions, we have to realize that when we're in conflict, we naturally think and talk in positions. And there's statements or demands framed as basically solutions, like turn that music off now. It's a position that demands a specific outcome that meets our immediate need. And positions often contain some incomplete information, a hidden agenda, or maybe even some posturing. And so, for instance, if I'm having trouble getting my daughter to sleep, and my neighbor who rescues dogs, and 3 beautiful dogs, their dogs like to always yap at about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. When I say shut those dogs up now, I haven't said that to him. That's missing information. That I'm putting myself in a position where my immediate demand for an outcome is you shut those dogs up now. But what I've withheld from the situation, what I have created in incomplete information is I'm struggling to put my 1-year-old to bed. I'm struggling to put my 1-year-old to sleep because her window is right next to where your dogs are. And so we're actually walking ourselves into conflict because we have incomplete information that we're not sharing or we're even unaware of. And so when we talk about interests on the other hand are underlying wants, needs, fears, hopes, concerns that motivate us to hold our positions. They're broader than positions, and they reflect some of our values. So for instance, if you are in a job and you just go into your boss and you say, I want a $30,000 salary, the boss might be like, yeah, no, thanks very much, see you later. But if you say, I'm really struggling financially and I feel like I've been a good contributor to this organization and I feel like I can do good things to this company, I would like you to consider a $30,000 salary. There's a lot more information there that's being presented. And what you start to see is part of the key of being a good communicator in the midst of conflict is learning to merge from position statements to interest sharing. And I'll give you some more examples in just a second. And so how do we get out of that? Like, how do we move that way? And so what we kind of suggest is some steps that we want to basically say that we want to learn how to reframe our locked in positions as interests. So for instance, my neighbors need to move. That's our locked in position. It actually becomes that I'm really concerned about the noise level of the late night partying that goes on at my neighbor's place. So right there, we've reframed a position that seems untenable, that seems highly emotive, and automatically sets people up in a conflictory relationship as one that expresses a legitimate concern in the context of the neighborhood. Let me just grab a drink, hold on. And so part of what we're learning to do, I don't blame Twitter for this, but I always reflect on the fact that when Twitter has created a world where we have to learn to express our feelings, it used to be 120 characters or less. I think it's gone up if you're a verified tweeter. Anyway, is that we are learning to become less communicative with our words rather than understanding that people, generally speaking, and I say generally because there are always exceptions to the rule, people are generally more understanding the more they know and the more we share. And the more that we actually seek a common ground. And interestingly, in Asian culture, they call this giving the other person the opportunity to save face. In other words, you never want to embarrass someone in the Asian culture by putting them in a position where if they admit to something, they are totally embarrassed for it. And so when you put someone in a situation where it has to have a winner and a loser, there is a very, very difficult position to be in, and there's not really much room to move. And so one of the things we want to talk about is starting to want to understand the person on the other side of our conflict. Tell me more about why that's important to you. What are you most concerned about? What do you care most about? And these are some questions that if we learn to ask, when someone comes to you and says, would you please turn off your music? It's always blaring. Not in a patronizing way to go, so why is that important to you? Wow, you know, I might not have realized it's that loud. Can you give me a little bit more of understanding why that's a problem? And what we like to say is commit to being a lifelong learner, commit to being a learner, and commit to being an asker. And I am going through these fairly quickly because we do want to leave time for some questions and discussions. But once we kind of have that information, we can then start to, as we mentioned earlier, potentially find creative ways. Because if I don't want to turn my music down, or, you know, I haven't served in the Army, but I've read books of where people who come home with PTSD often need loud music to help them sleep and help them to relax. It's a piece of information we might not necessarily have known. And so just learning to understand questions like, tell me what would help you feel better about that? Or what do you want your relationship to be like in the future? How would you want to have that handled if it happens again? So here are some things that when we learn to ask them. So I'm really sorry that I was mowing my yard at 6 a.m. in the morning. And by the way, I do this. I'm a terrible neighbor. But I like to get out before my whole family's out and mow the lawn. Well, my neighbor doesn't appreciate that. So we had a conversation about, we had to have a discussion about, hey, what works well for you? Can I mow it at like 8 or maybe 7:45? And so, hey, if I forget and I don't do it, you know, how would you like us to handle that if it happens again? Like, do you just want to text me? And it's like, yeah, can I just text you? And so, you know, we swap phone numbers and so, you know, if I'm a jerk and I forget because I'm stressed or whatever it is, and I start mowing the lawn at 7 o'clock, you know, he's got free reign to drop me a text and say, dude, you're an idiot. So that. But the reality is that we can find ourselves very quickly in situations where I'm yelling, you're yelling, and before you know it, we are trying to out yell each other. We are becoming increasingly agitated, increasingly potentially angry. And the question is, we don't necessarily know how to step out of that. We don't necessarily know how to get out of that situation where we feel like it's escalating, and getting to that place where we both call the police over something that might be a dog, might be record, might be whatever, a CD, whatever it is. So here are just some thoughts for us in terms of how to de-escalate it. Interestingly enough, these are the similar ideas that Advos has been sharing when it comes to, if you go to our website, advos.org, these are some of the ideas we're sharing with people, particularly white folk, when you are trying to understand issues of racism, but you don't know where to start. And so these are some of the ideas that we have shared. The first thing is really learn to start as a listener. And this is hard because if your neighbor comes at your face and starts yelling at you, where do you go? And so we talk about just asking yourself, who's this person before me? Like, what are the assumptions and maybe the biases that I have about him? Can I put those biases aside to start to hear from this person? What is the story behind the situation? You know, and particularly when it's talking about issues of, for instance, racism, if you have an African-American neighbor or a neighbor of color, that becomes a whole different issue when we're talking about calling police and dealing with police, because as we process as a staff and talk to some of our staff who are African-American and some of our volunteers the same way, they will not, some of them just don't feel like they can call the police because of what they have grown up with. Not where we are today, but what they've grown up with. And some of those stories in Chester County, Westchester, but that's a discussion for another time. What can I learn here? Not to use as a weapon against my neighbor, but to enlighten myself. So, you know, if I'm playing loud music while I'm grilling at 7 p.m. at night and my neighbor always seems to come home or seems to come over the fence and just cuss me out, do I even know what my neighbor's job is? Do I know they have a schedule? Are they the type of people that have to get up at 2 a.m. for their work? Are they a shift worker? Am I doing things that I don't necessarily have to do, but I'm just choosing to do because I have the freedom to do it? And again, can I continue to put my own opinions and biases and stories aside? And when I notice that I'm repeatedly not able to listen, I need to make that clear politely before I become totally impatient and irritable. Mrs. Jones, I'm really struggling where I am right now to have a conversation that is peaceful and patient right now. And I understand that I've done some things that have upset you. Is it possible that we could have this conversation in the morning? And so we say the first step in de-escalating is learn to be a listener. The second step we talk about when we're talking about de-escalating is become a facilitator. It helps me to think about this kind of phase as walking beside someone as they're having these issues. Are there questions that I can ask? What is this person feeling? Is there a story that I'm not aware of? And this is a hard one for me, this next one, is can I even summarize what I hear them saying? As I become a listener, do I know what they're saying, or is all I'm hearing them say, turn off your bleeping music? Can I name what I hear is important for that person? And can I affirm that the value that this person actually has value? And so as you have these interactions, becoming a facilitator, we always ask, the last step is can I ask them for the opportunity or the permission to share my perspective, to share my story? And what we particularly find interesting about this last one is in conflict situations, and even situations where we deal with victims of crime, when the offender asks the victim, can I tell my own story? And we're talking about people that are on probation and parole here. We have very rarely, if ever, heard them say, no, I'm not interested in hearing your story. And so asking for the opportunity to tell my story and say, hey, I'm really sorry, I wasn't aware of X, Y, Z. And so to be deeply present to a conversation and to be heard, it's helpful to find a time to tell your own story. And this is different from my opinion on an issue. Like, you shouldn't be so antsy about having music on really loud because it's only 7 o'clock. That's an opinion on an issue. Sharing your stories, your story is true for you. Like, I've just always come home and, I've always grown up with grilling and chilling and listening to music. When we tell our stories, whatever it might be, conversations about racism and interactions with our neighbors that we feel are getting really hot-headed, we find that it is very hard, if not impossible, for someone to deny your story. They can't deny its validity, but that's why we kind of talk about the fact that it's important to move away from positions where potentially neither of you have a way out, into interest. And so I know that some of these things are difficult and challenging, particularly in the ideas of dealing with people who could be difficult and problematic. But there are stories. So when I first moved in here, I was told by my neighbor who lives behind me that the guy who lives beside me is really difficult. And so my wife and I said, we're going to take the time to, number one, learn the gentleman's name, and number two, hear his story. And so, we said that within a certain period of time we were going to do it, and if we didn't do it, we would be very annoyed with ourselves. And so we found out the gentleman's name and that he rescues dogs that have been in a pound for too long, and then he'll babysit these dogs until the pounds can find somewhere for them to go, so these dogs don't have to live in there. And now my kids love the dogs. Every time they hear the puppies bark, my little 2-year-old runs around going, puppy. And so Mr. Tim is he's a neighbor who we understand his story. And so part of that then means that when we've had situations regarding property lines, like who's mowing where or trees growing out, the relationship that we have with Mr. Tim is not so much as a, would you just do what I say, which is a position. It becomes much more of an interest. And so part of the things that we have really talked about is that sometimes, not all the time, as I said earlier, sometimes there is a lot, I'm going to stop sharing the screen as we talk about some other issues, but sometimes there are positions for people to be able to get out of if we don't create this position. So I want to pause before we transition to the next idea of just when do we actually even call the police, and see if there is questions or statements or comments, because I do have the tendency to talk too much. And Carl, I will send you this, and you can add it to the minutes and send out to people who might like a copy of this presentation.
Thank you. It's a great resource.
Any questions or statements or feelings or issues that you feel may not necessarily work in this, or you're not necessarily sure?
Yeah, feel free to drop questions
Tim,
in the
is there
chat.
anybody from the public that we want to give first dibs on?
So there is a number on screen right now for those watching the
Tim,
stream.
You're muted, sir.
Oh, sorry. They can hear me on the stream, but you guys can't hear me. Now everybody can hear me. There is a phone number at the bottom of the screen. if you are interested in dialing in to ask any questions about this topic.
Okay, so nothing now, right?
Not right now, it doesn't look like.
Okay. I guess Chris, I'm listening to what you're saying. It sounds like a lot of this is really based in like the best case scenario is you just kind of open up a relationship first. Before anything happens, before you know you can anticipate any, it's all about like being early. And if you can't do that, then it probably takes some courage to take the first step of having whatever that conversation is.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there's no substitute for that, you know.
And I think, one of the things that we've heard people say we do, one of the services we provide is, and actually I skipped over a couple things, but some of the services we provide is in neighborly disputes. I'm going to bring this up real quick. Sorry there, Carl, I forgot a couple of things.
Right.
But we do basically provide areas of mediation in neighbors, landlords, tenants, and so one of the things that I personally believe is it's never too late to meet a neighbor. It's never too late to say to someone, "Look, I've been living here for however long, and I don't even know your name, and I'm so sorry for that." And I'm Chris, and I had to do that to somebody. Are we the stream folks?
This is the first meeting we've This is the first meeting we've done virtually. I mean, we've done it amongst ourselves, but we hadn't had them public. So working out the kinks.
Fantastic. Well, it's a great environment to do it. So I guess one of the other things that Carl, you asked us to kind of discuss really is that transition when you feel like things are just beyond that point of having a natural dialogue, and you're asking yourself, is it even something that I call the police about? You know, I want to start off by saying one of the things that is that we have heard of, and we do some work obviously with police in the city and parole officers, is that, you know, there's the feeling that police are being put into, they have over time moved into positions or into roles that they were never actually designed to be. Social workers, you'll see them walking along the street having conversations with people that are homeless, trying to make determinations of whether or not they need to do things there. And you know, even the context of where we are right now, you know, what is de-escalation training? What does that look like? How do they know when to de-escalate? And so I think that we really have to ask ourselves, as Carl mentioned earlier, that is this a conversation? Is this a situation where we are in I like to call it urgent and emergent danger? In other words, is it something that if it's not dealt with in you know, the 2 point however many minutes they say that the police get there, then there's going to be either a loss of life, limb, or something more serious. Wait, that is pretty serious. I don't think there's anything more serious than that. Whether it's loss of life, loss of body parts, you know, and I'm being somewhat crass on that, but and then, you know, I'll share with you over the past kind of 2 years, I've had a whole bunch of back surgeries, and so I've had to personally learn what is something that I go to my doctor about, and what is something that I need to go to a hospital about when it comes to my, you know, the various things I have implanted in my back. And so I think in the same way, we have those discussions when it comes to involving the police. What is something that is a matter of just having to deal with immediately, and what is something that is merely, and I love what Carl said when we were talking, is this an inconvenience, or is this something that needs to be dealt with? And I shared that situation with the fireworks, because for me, it seemed like, turn those fireworks off now, my daughter wants to sleep, I'm calling the police. That was an inconvenience. But as a white middle-aged guy, I'm gonna own it. I was like, the police can solve my problems. My wife was like, don't be an idiot. And so, you know, when we are in those situations, to really be asking ourselves, is this an inconvenience? Am I just what do I expect them to do when they turn up? Is this something that we can talk about later? Can I even handle this on my own? You know, is this something I could try to even talk out with someone? And then, you know, even is this something that we could use basically a professional help with? And I mentioned earlier that that's something that Advos does and has done in the past with mediation between neighbors and landlords and tenants and whatever it may be, because sometimes there are situations where, number one, the police aren't going to necessarily know how to deal with them, but they are still an issue. And so potentially having in your mind, whoever is listening, just maybe a mental checklist, maybe a fridge checklist, something that when you're totally heated up and you feel like you don't know how to make a rational or sane decision, you can go and look at, oh, wait a second, they're not, you know, someone is not breaking into my house, they're playing loud music. This is an inconvenience. Now, I will say that, you know, in some cases, yes, you know, there are noise ordinances and disturbance ordinances. But as Katie rightly shared, you know, sometimes there are times when we have to kind of say, wait a second, I don't really even know the situation. And I use that example, like, is it the only way they can get to sleep? Are they shift workers who just can't get to sleep any other way? You know, what's that story? Maybe taking the time to have that conversation, and then really understanding, is this an inconvenience or is this an emergency? And then really that's that difference between urgent and an urgent situation and an emergency situation. Is this an ongoing situation that is not an emergency that maybe if we had trained mediators to help us work through, we could potentially navigate through those decisions. And there are other things as well. Maybe the police is not necessarily the option, but is the landlord an option? And so, yeah, I got the 4 puppies around. And so there are different things that I think that if we haven't necessarily thought through for ourselves, if we don't necessarily know when we're calm, how we deal with something, we're not going to know how we deal with something when we're emotive. And I think that's something that even for me, I have to know that in my, you know, in my head too. And so, you know, I'll give you another example. During, you know, early on in COVID, there was a spate of crazy level of 6 or 7 motorcyclists speeding down Marietta. I'm talking topping 120 plus on the motorcycles. Now, do you call 911 or do you call the Borough Township Police? Now, for me, we just made a call and said, hey, we're worried about these guys. It's not an emergency situation, but this kind of thing's going on. We can't necessarily talk to them because they're going so fast, but I don't know how you guys would deal with the situation. We're just going to leave it with you. And so that's a decision there to not necessarily go to 911, but to go to the borough and just say, hey, I don't even know what the situation is or what to do. And so there is this element where also looking at the police and saying, well, maybe they can be of assistance if I'm maybe having a conversation with the local police as opposed to 911. But you got to also ask yourself the question that if you get the police involved in something, what's going to be the impact for you? What's going to be the impact for the other person? Are you both going to find yourselves in court? Are you both going to find yourselves arrested? Are you both going to get citations for disorderly conduct? And then those things can snowball very quickly. And so if there are particular situations in your mind for those people who are on YouTube, those people who are everybody who's listening, if you have a situation, start to unpack it with some of the things we've talked about tonight. Like, what would it look like if I took 7 or 8 steps back and decided, you know what, I'm going to step right out of the box and I'm going to start to get to know them before I start to go down a path that could see both of us in front of the police. And so I would thoroughly recommend just taking the time to draw out your list of how you would respond right now when you're calm, so that when you're feeling like you can't make a decision because your heart's beating really fast, you're yelling at maybe your spouse, or you're yelling at your kids, be quiet, I got to deal with this situation. You have your go-to resource.
Yeah. So Chris, I feel like what you're saying still is that you almost have to, when it's person to person, so it's something you can deal with because there's another person to deal with, you have to be willing to invest more in the relationship, not necessarily less, as opposed, when you defer to this other external authority, you're kind of like offloading the work of this, like, kind of like ethics of care that you have to consider about what you're doing, and that can be hard and it takes some courage. But even like I had a neighbor who always parks his car in front of his house, like directly in front of his house, and it meant that other vehicles can't park there. And then another neighbor came down, and honestly, like, this is somebody that I'm kind of like, I don't talk to him much. He seems kind of odd to me, but he did knock on the door, waited there very respectfully, said his piece, and and actually it was fine, and I was honestly a little impressed. Like, he had the courage to like take that step, because even people parking their cars, you live in the city, like, that's where the fights start. When it comes to like fireworks, I think that's a hard situation, because you can't talk to the kid who's in the alley lighting them off, and they're lighting them off all the time, all day, every day. And there's a little bit of a fire hazard there too. So I leave people. I kind of think like people have to do what they have to do. I don't want anybody's house to catch on fire. But it's interesting. If you don't mind, I made up a list of some things, and I wanted to kind of get the board and maybe your reaction on some of these things.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think like the checklist I kind of made for myself, this doesn't need to stand for everybody, but I said, 1, is this merely an inconvenience to me? Can I put up with this, and would that be okay? 2, I need to respond. Can I handle it on my own? Is this something I could try to talk out in person? 3, no, I need backup. Is there a friend or a neighbor or someone who I could call to help me? 4, no, I need a professional. Can we use mediation through maybe a service like what ADVAS offers or LHOP offers, to talk through what's happening? Or is there an emergency response hotline I could call? So if someone's having a mental health crisis, there is a Lancaster County crisis hotline, trained professionals who are not police officers. Police might show up, but trained professionals who know how to deal with mental health crisis will also potentially show up to deal with a situation they're really, put together to deal with. And I think oftentimes, the mental health crisis is what's really needed. And then number 5, if I call the police, do I understand how involving them could impact me and the other person?
Right.
And so like if I do, taking that other step, need to involve them, can I report online or at the police station itself? Do I need to bring them into my neighborhood to
Right.
like have that interaction? If someone seems erratic, are you able to just ask them, hey, are you okay? If there's a car accident, somebody's pull over and it's like, that's a strange car, what are they doing there? And you ask them, are they okay? Just thinking about why you might be actually perceiving what's going on as threatening, and
Yep.
taking a step back from that. And then also if somebody's having a party or something, like the noise stuff, see if you can talk to them early about your concerns. Something that I learned a lot about this year, because I put together the newsletter for the neighborhood, is that the police, in response to COVID, did this thing that I thought was really smart. You can now report incidents online. You don't need a police officer to come out. And if you've ever had a minor, petty theft or something like that, the officer is going to come there, write it down on a piece of paper, and say thanks, bye. Like you don't need a guy with a gun to do that. And so that online reporting tool is really good. Basically, it's for any theft of less than $2,000 in value or vandalism less than $2,000, lost property or pets, online harassment. And then once that's submitted, you get a ticket from the records division so you can track it. I thought that was like great. And because again, I want the cops working on like solving the murder and, making sure that someone is safe. I don't really honestly need a police officer to come and log my bike theft. It's just not necessary. So that's kind of how I had been thinking about it. And I just want to open up the discussion that way.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the times when we hear about, you read Nextdoor, stuff like that, a lot of the reasons why people call the police do like boil down to those inconvenience issues. And the way that I try to think about it is we've chosen to live in the city, and by nature of living in the city, we're going to be next to each other, and there's going to be some inconveniences, but we get a lot of like joy out of living in the city as well. So I try to just like let a lot of that stuff slide,
Yeah.
One thing I'll say that's interesting. Sorry.
No, go on, please.
I was going to say, one thing that's interesting is to ask yourself the question, and we dealt with it very briefly, but if the police turn up, what are they going to do? And I think there's two things that we've touched on that the police will do. The first thing that they will do is work actively to de-escalate a situation. And then the second thing they'll work to do is that they'll try and figure out what happened. And when they try to figure out what happened, you're right back to the situation of positions again. Positions where you want something, they want something, and you're right back to the things we talked about before. And so realizing that, okay, if I call the police, again, we're talking about something where it's not necessarily a life or death situation, but that's the two things they're going to do, right? They're going to try and de-escalate it, and they're going to try and figure out what happened. And figuring out what happens puts you in those positions where you want something and they want something, and well, how do you figure it out? And so I think that's a really great question to ask. If I involve the police, what's going to happen? What's the outcome that's gonna be? Well, I'll tell you one thing that's going to happen is after the police leave, you're both going to hate each other. That's the first thing. And I think the second part of it is that it changes potentially irreconcilably the relationship between the two of you. And I think that's I guess that was the same point twice. But the point being is that you have this opportunity to say to yourself, okay, what do I need to do to be in front of positions to diffuse them? Because I think, as you rightly pointed out, Carl, mental health situations are not what we should be calling the police for. The police are not trained in mental health management issues. And sometimes what can happen, and again, I have a number of friends that work for the police force, so I don't say this in any level of disrespect, but it can actually make matters worse when you might be dealing with people that are bipolar, that are schizophrenic, and the police just might not necessarily be trained in how to de-escalate those situations. And so rightly, there are people in the Lancaster Crisis Intervention Team that can come and help those situations. And so there's greater complexity than as we said at the start. I have a position, I want this sorted out, and I want it sorted out now. And so there's I think we can all admit human relationships by nature are ridiculously complex. I can't figure out my 6-year-old daughter.
Yeah. I'm gonna just run down a quick list before we end of entities that I kind of looked up that I thought in certain circumstances might be a better alternative than calling the police. So, we've talked a lot tonight about mediation, and that's a service that AdVoz offers. I understand that you've even been called in by some of the district judges to deal with some of these like pretty arcane issues. But LHOP also offers this services to people dealing with their landlords, and they're always advocating like, hey, like bring us in to talk because you don't want it to get to the point of an eviction. There's victim support for individuals who are victims of domestic violence through the Community Action Partnership. You may know best the relationship with the person who's in a dangerous situation, and they may tell you, because however you became informed of it or involved in it for whatever reason, I don't want to involve the police. You should respect the wishes of the person to stay safe and make those decisions. And there are other entities that you can involve. So like the Community Action Partnership here is the Coalition Against Domestic Violence for the state's affiliate. For sexual assault, that's the YWCA, the Coalition Against Rape affiliate. If someone's having an issue that's legal in nature, maybe a civil issue, something like that, or Mid-Penn Legal Services in town is the state's legal services entity. So if you're below a certain income threshold, they can help you. Mental health crisis, like I always knew that there was the county mental health office and they had a responsibility to perform this function, but I actually didn't really know like there was in fact a phone number you can call and get somebody out there to help with the situation. And we'll post the numbers after all this. If you come across someone who's unsheltered, like I live by the 6th Ward Park, and there are definitely people who live or sleep from time to time in the park, and I'm kind of live and let live about it. Most of them are pretty respectful. But if someone's in a tough situation, Lanco My Home, the county continuum of care for homelessness services, can help with that. If you got graffiti, like again, the cops aren't going to come and fix the graffiti, but the Public Works Department actually, I believe, has a program to do that. And I think drug use is one that from time to time we've all kind of come across someone who may be using drugs of some nature. There are entities to deal with that if the person's not in danger. The RAISE Project of Lancaster, Compass Mark is this, I believe, the county single authority on drug and alcohol use services. So there are entities out there. I don't want to, again, if you're in danger, if someone you know is in danger, you need to do what you need to do in that situation. That's okay, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. But I just want to, again, question our priors a little more, and I hope that people can kind of come away from this being willing to have the courage to invest a little more in their relationships with others.
Yeah. And I will say just one thing, it's quite interesting. LHOP often does referrals to AdVoS. So if you have a dispute with a landlord or a neighbor, save you the call, you can basically kind of give us a call first. Now we have kind of fee services. We do have on our site, quite reasonable fees for services, but LHOP often does do the referrals. We just had one, a couple of the other coming in last month to AdVoS, depending upon the nature of what it is. So we're happy to help. And I'll just echo what Carl said. This is not a talk to say don't call the police. It's really a call to say, how can we utilize some amazing services. And so I know many of the folks who are in these organizations, and they're great organizations, and they love they love the city, and they love to do what they can.
So Tim, do we have anybody who wants to ask anything, and of course I'm doing a lot of talking too. I'm sure other people want to speak. I don't want to take it up.
It looks like we've had I think that's Andrew Lefevre join. It looks like he's frozen though. So I think he has something to say. He's just not able to say it right now.
Sorry, Andy.
Also, Karen has mentioned in the chat ongoing music issues with neighbors.
Oh yeah, I mean, let's do an example before we go on this issue. So let's talk about like the dog poop. I can't believe we got to talk about this. But we've got a person who's really putting up with a lot, it seems. And she's just at her wit's end with somebody letting not curbing their dog in her yard.
Yeah, it's bad enough when the dog
I
poop.
never know what to say.
Right, it's bad enough when it's on the sidewalk, but this is like actually in her private parking area. She's got dog poop every day.
She put up a sign. I think she put out like botanicals to try and keep the dogs away or something. But she's putting up with a lot. But I always think too, like, what are the police gonna do? You know, they're not gonna set up a sting for the guy walking the dog.
A poop sting.
Yeah. So.
You know, it's interesting because as we, and this is semi-related, as we process the story and the Adverse's response to the George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and the Breonna Taylor incidences, we were reflecting on various things, and I think it just, again, it comes down to I don't, you know, we laugh because we don't understand the logic of the individual involved, but it's almost funny to say, okay, what is the logic? What is the situation that we're even talking about? Because it might, and I'm not saying it is, but it might be, you know, there could be situations here that we talked about it earlier, you know, mental health related issues, some deeper situations than we're even aware of. And so again, it almost comes down to saying not necessarily a sting per se, but trying to do, you know, what you can to kind of have to build that connection, to try and find the answer. Because, you know, you could call, you know, the Lancaster Crisis Intervention Team or the police, but the police are going to say, you know, when does it happen? I don't know. Who does it? I don't know. You know, it's those really kind of interesting questions that, again, we come back to say we just don't know. And what we talked about, to start moving from positions to interests, like I want it cleaned up and that person obviously doesn't want it cleaned up. You know, how do we get to discovering why this person is using their dog in this way? Like, you know, we laugh about it, but again, it comes back to the things that we would do. I don't know which one of you it is, but let's just say it's Carl. If Carl finds the person and we get the two of you together, we would actually ask each of you to tell your stories. You know, what got us to where we are today, and that's actual, believe it or not, that is a tool that not just we use, but also lawyers use in mediations as well. And so, yeah, it's a really, you know, we laugh, but, you know, who is the person? Why do they do it? It's weird.
Yeah. Okay. Well, got any other last statements, questions? Anybody got?
I've got a couple quick examples. I don't know, I've been able to get a long way with simply politely asking people, you know, talking to them. Once here, just after I moved in, my neighbors were having a party in their backyard, and normally that's cool, but it was a school night, and so, you know, 3 years ago, my kids were younger, and that was a problem. So I put my ladder against the back fence, and I climbed up there, and I peered over, and I said, "Hey, my kids are trying to sleep. Can you just turn it down?" You know, I didn't say turn it off, or, you know, I just asked them to please turn it down a little bit. And, you know, they were like, "Yeah, sure, okay." And kind of a more extreme example, one time I was in Philly for a conference doing a Airbnb, and downstairs there was like a raging party of a bunch of 20 somethings. And I just put on my clothes and I walked downstairs and said, "Hey, you know, it's midnight now and I'm trying to sleep. Can you turn it down a little bit?" And they did. So, you know, I understand. Everyone has different experiences, but and not all my experiences have always been good. But
Hey, Karen,
you know,
we've got you.
starting that way helps. Oh, hey, Karen.
Low view.
Do you want to queue up? Oh, did we lose her? Karen, before we lose you, do you want to queue up your question?
Yeah.
I wonder if it's internet issues or if we are taxing Jitsi to the max with this many people.
Yeah.
Zoom may be horrible, but maybe that's why people use Zoom, is they can cram more people into these meetings.
Yeah, I didn't feel so bad. I've been on Zoom all day, so when it was like it's not Zoom, I was like, "Thank you, Carl. Not another Zoom meeting."
Yeah, I think Karen is either frozen or very good at sitting very still.
We did that in the staff meeting once. Tried to convince people who was really frozen and who was really there. It's interesting that now it's Alex's example. It's just, again, it's the basic tenet that I don't think people ever wake up in the morning and set out to be jerks. And so that, again, that's what we talked about earlier, about taking the time to find the value in other people and realizing that your neighbors have this intrinsic value that they have. And I think that's what we're all learning in the midst of these new discussions surrounding, how do we ensure that our African American and people of color brothers and sisters feel like they have that value. But as Alex said, he put his pants on, put his shirt on, went down quietly, said, "Hey, it's kind of midnight. Would you mind just maybe turning it down?" He didn't stomp down and go, "If you don't turn off the music, I'm calling the police," which puts you in a position. Alex was like, "We've got this common situation. It's kind of midnight." And most people go, "Oh, yeah, wow, it's midnight. I kind of forgot because I've had too many drinks," or whatever it may be. So, yeah, great example, Alex. And you're right. Not everything works that way.
Right. Well, I'm sorry that Karen isn't able to get through, and I don't know even where Andy is. He's like in the ether, but Chris, we've kept you for the time, and we really appreciate your willingness to jump on and talk with us. So thank you, and we'll make some of this information available to everybody. It was a good conversation.
I will, Carl, if you remind me, actually, we won't be in the office tomorrow. Tomorrow is Juneteenth for the people that we that we serve. So we're taking the time to celebrate African American and people of color tomorrow. And so if you want to email me on Monday, Carl, I'll get you the slides over to you, and you can distribute them out.
Thanks so much. Have
Folks,
a good
thanks
night.
for letting me crash your party.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Chris. All right, Tim, you want to take us into the business? I'm
Sure.
sorry. Karen,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
to the neighbors watching, we will try to. Is it really just a limit? Because now, Andrew, you're here.
He's alive.
Oh gosh.
I could not get to work for like an hour.
It makes me think that there is an actual limit on the number of concurrent participants, because as soon as
That could be
Chris
it.
dropped, what do you have for us? I kind of expected that you have some thoughts here.
He's got COVID hair, that's for sure.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Oh,
you
yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely have been. I haven't seen any noise or firework ordinance violations yet in my office. So I think that's interesting. But we've only been reopened for about 2 weeks now. So we're all still getting caught up on the enormous backlog of things we've been having. But it is an interesting conversation. And I did hear a lot of the ADVA's presentation, and it definitely, I mean, when you call the cops, even for like a low level ordinance kind of issue, you're going to probably get subpoenaed and you're going to have to come to court, and it's probably going to eat up, either a morning or an afternoon of your day. So it's definitely something to consider. But yeah, it's interesting. It really
Yeah, and I
is.
think so. The last time you joined us, you were talking about tenants' rights, but I think a lot of the same things you said that night probably apply here too. Like you said that you have cases all the time where it turns out that like both parties just hadn't talked to one another. For
sure. And yeah, I mean, it's I have some issues with one of my neighbors, and it's at times seems intractable, but especially in the position I'm in, like calling the cops for something would really be something that I would not do. It's just I couldn't and shouldn't do it. So communication definitely has helped, even in the issues we've had. And like I guess they were doing a lot of renovating, and they were throwing carpet foam, like big rolls of carpet foam, into their backyard, and then the squirrels were taking the carpet foam and chewing off pieces of it and depositing all those small pieces of foam into my yard. which I was not pleased with at all.
Right.
But and it went on for a while, and eventually I just had to have a discussion with the guy, and he cleaned it up. No police needed. So that was fortunate that worked out.
The power of talking to people.
I know it's unbelievable.
My wife had to have the same conversation, I think, with the guy to bring his dog inside when it was cold out, but he did do it.
Yep, same guy.
Karen, you're with us.
I think I'm back. Is the sound working?
It's working.
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh, jeez. How frustrating. Talk about wanting to yell at somebody. I've had an ongoing dispute with my neighbor since last summer, and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse, and there's no talk. When I did go over at 11:30 at night to ask them to turn the music down after my granddaughter came out and said, I can't sleep, the noise is too loud. And these neighbors have lived here for quite a while. And I politely went down, said, excuse me, would you please turn the music down, and got verbally blasted for like 15 minutes by two of the neighbors. I'm not going to do that again. But the every time I come home, they turn the music up. It's like as soon as they see me come in the door, they turn the music up and sit right outside my windows. And I can't talk to them. So, police may be an option.
But it's good you had the courage to talk to him the first time. A lot of people don't even do that.
I was very kind. It wasn't nasty at all. And so I literally got verbally attacked, and now it's just harassment.
Yeah, it sounds like you could definitely use some sort of neutral third party there.
Yeah, something has to happen. I contacted the landlord. The landlord's not willing to get involved. The landlord told me to call the police.
Wow.
Have you thought about buying a larger stereo?
I thought about doing that, and then I thought, let's try and be the bigger person here. Because I don't want to annoy the other neighbors. I've asked the other neighbors, and their windows are a different direction, so they don't hear it like I do. But I do have a tenant, and she says, yeah, it gets loud down there as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Is Andy Lefevre still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can I file any type of civil action?
Well, I mean, you'd have to have damages.
Oh, I have damages.
Haven't slept in 10 years.
Again, that is a circumstance where, I mean, there's really, at this point in the way our system is set up, potentially no other option than calling the police. I mean,
yeah, and I don't like to do that.
I know.
Like they have better too.
But I get a lot of noise violation like trials during the week. Like they're common, and it's a city, but and from what I've seen, it gets to a point where this is the situation where the victim, because there is a victim, gets to a point where they cannot deal with it anymore. They have no other options left. And that's what the courts are for. I mean, that's the point, like, of having, like, unfortunately getting the police involved, but there's a disinterested third party now involved who's not a part of the police and has theoretically no connection with any of the parties, who's going to hear the case and make a decision.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you should do. I mean, honestly, it sounds like you don't have any other options at this point. So
I really don't. I'm at my wit's end, and it's every day, every weekend and every evening, right outside my window.
I mean, outside of getting some like military grade speakers, I think the police is probably the best option at this point.
Now, what is it? Younger
Okay,
people
yes,
can hear the higher pitched frequencies. Maybe you could target them if they're sufficiently younger than you.
And think about that.
Teenager repellent. You just Google up teenager repellent sounds, and that'll give you the specs for that frequencies and things. And there's apps that generate noises at that frequency. Yeah.
I thought about releasing a bunch of mosquitoes so they don't want to snout there.
Oh, so you're actually a pro murder hornet then?
Maybe. I probably couldn't admit that where other people can hear it. But...
Yeah, that's true. This is a recorded meeting, just for the record.
Recording.
Okay. I think I should probably be
Great.
quiet.
Okay, we have just a little bit of board business to zip through. Anybody who is interested in board business, please stay on. If that bores you to tears, I will talk to you all later. But here we go. Alex, I did correct the May 2020 minutes link in our agenda for tonight. The minutes haven't changed since I sent them out. Any corrections to add to the minutes before we would approve those? Any motion to approve those?
I move to approve the minutes.
I second.
Any objections? All right, unanimously approved. The Lancaster Neighborhood Grant, so this is the bulletin board thing. I will be submitting the official grant application after we get off this call tonight. And for those that aren't in the loop on that, the city is talking about giving neighborhood groups a $2,500 grant to basically find ways to connect neighbors in the time that we're in. Carl has been producing an email newsletter for, I mean, it's literally been years now. And we've long been told that like there are neighbors that, just don't have access to, electronic means of communication to consistently stay in the loop with the group. So what we've put in for our grant application is to place 3 bulletin boards around the neighborhood. 6 Ward Park, we're going to ask for permission for the parking lot of Turkey Hill. And then also at the corner of Lime and Park, they're at the Lancaster Cemetery. Those will be outdoor bulletin boards where we'll post the newsletter on a monthly basis. And then at various businesses and churches in the neighborhood, we'll also be asking for, a little bit of indoor bulletin board space to post the newsletter there as well. Hopefully just to keep people better informed of what's going on. I actually had a conversation with Ebenezer Baptist this week, mentioned that my first Neighbors United meeting was in the basement of that church. And, it was kind of striking. He said, I miss Neighbors United. We need groups like that in the neighborhood. And it's like, ooh, yeah, the fact that you don't know that we're still around means that we should probably be doing a better job of like communicating our existence and also like getting from those organizations the needs that they have for the neighborhood so that we can work on their behalves. So if there's no concerns with the grant, I'll be, again, submitting that tonight. The due date is tomorrow, basically. I had asked for...
Thank you to everybody who put the grant together. You did a really nice job. And something that I wonder if we can do once we get them is that obviously, we'll be able to post a newsletter. That's cool. But I would love to like take, if we're going to get actually 3 of them, take one of them and use it as an installation of quote unquote like art to honor the people who in our neighborhood have been working through this public health emergency, maybe at the hospitals, but maybe not. And, take people like, hey, if you know somebody, submit a name, we don't have to put their whole name. We can say like John on the 300 block of Ice Avenue or something like that. I would love to do that. And I think it ties again into this idea of like the situation we're dealing with COVID.
Yeah, the bulletin boards that Alex was getting quotes for the posts for are big enough that we could have the newsletter and art installations. So, totally.
Yeah, and the price that I got from Coletta later on a follow-up email, she said that was on the high end, and volunteers helping to dig the holes will lower that cost.
I know where we can get some shovels.
Well, a posthole digger be a lot faster.
I think we have posthole diggers up at the cemetery too. So either way, we're good.
Good, cool.
It is funny when we're getting our digging implements from the cemetery.
Hey, man, tools of the trade. I did want to run through a couple of STEM opportunities just to get them in the minutes and also make sure that the neighbors know. If you have kids that are Science Factory age, they are running scholarship programs this year for some STEM-related camps. And I mentioned Ebenezer Baptist. They're interested in turning one of their rooms into kind of a STEM workshop classroom area. we'll be working as a group to help them get that up and running. If any of our neighbors have an interest in being involved with that, please reach out to me, and we can rally our forces together and turn that into something pretty interesting.
Just to double check, that's like kindergarten to 8th grade, or can older kids?
I don't know. That sounds about right.
Okay.
And in their link, in their summer camp link, they do have like age ranges, I think, for each individual. Yeah, K through 8 is the recommended for most of them. Some are K through 2 and 3 through 8 and whatever.
Yeah.
Any updates on the Pretty Porch contest that we should talk about tonight?
We have 30 entries, and Sunday I'm going to start taking 3 pictures of every entry to give to Milksy. So it seems to be going fine.
Great.
I will have to coordinate with a couple neighbors about getting into their backyard, but that shouldn't be a big deal. And yeah, so I'll get some exercise.
Excellent.
2 of those backyard veg contestants are literally across the street from me.
Okay.
So I can help out with that. The backyard stuff.
Well, that's nice of you to offer. I think I'll be fine doing it, but if I feel like it gets overwhelming, I'll let you know.
One question I had about the Google Sheet, I noticed that there are lots of multiple entries, and I think that it seems like there's only one person designated as first-time entrant. But then there's others that what category they apply to is blank. Are some of those blanks also indicating first-time entrant, or?
So a lot of the blanks are because when I initially set up the form, I copied the one I used from last year and forgot to put in the categorization. So I then went back and asked people to resubmit. So that's both the reason for the dupes and the blanks.
Okay.
Yeah, and Alex, it sounded like you have the signs on order as well.
They should arrive middle of next week.
Cool. Next up was Vision Zero. So I had posted about this earlier today on the group. Vision Zero is a project that the city has taken on to basically reduce fatal and serious injury accidents, mostly focused on pedestrians and cyclists. They're putting together a committee, citizens committee, to talk about that, and we're looking for volunteers. It looked like Noah had volunteered, and then there might be one other person that was interested on the post. They're looking for those people by the end of the day tomorrow. So if there's no objections, we can send Noah's name along. Doug was tagged by his wife, but Doug didn't explicitly say that he was interested in doing it either. So if I hear affirmatively from Doug himself that he is interested, I'll pass his name along as well. Anybody on the board interested in being on that as well?
Yeah, I think I would be.
Okay. I'm not sure how many people they're taking, but I will send the full list, and we'll see who makes the cut. Next up was officer elections. So since we last met, basically the way the nominations are standing right now, I've been nominated for president. Steve has been nominated for treasurer, and Andrew has been nominated for secretary. Anybody else want to throw their hat in the ring for any of those?
I move that we pass the slate as nominated.
Second.
Okay. No objections? So passed. And with that, I will get our 1023 easy filed, and we will actually be a nonprofit. The only thing I am missing, and don't tell me now because this is a recorded meeting and that would be rude, I do need Amy's street address. So I will reach out to Amy, but if anybody knows it off the top of their head, email me, and that'll help us get that filed.
So Tim, upon getting that filed,
Yep.
we will then be recognized by the state of Pennsylvania as a 501c3.
So the 501c3 designation is by the federal government. So that's what that comes from. The only designation left from PA, once we get the 501c3 designation, we then file to solicit charitable donations from Pennsylvania residents, which, given the fact that we have no financial records, we are like under their thresholds for that being a serious thing. So as soon as the 1023 letter comes back, it's kind of a slam dunk to just get that filed.
I guess what I'm really asking is, at what point are we capable of standing up our own bank account? Because I know the Alliance has very graciously again agreed to hold a little bit of money for us to get this thing going.
Yep. So we have now passed our board or our officers. That is the next thing on the list is the motion to open. Well, we'll adjust here. We need to make a motion to open a bank account. When we make that motion to open the bank account, we need to decide as a group who gets access to it. The treasurer should definitely have access to it. Should just all three officers have access to it? And if so, we'll need to just get together and go make that happen. Any objections to?
Probably be better not to have everybody have access, but I think the president and the treasurer are fine by me.
Okay.
And do we want every check to require 2 signatures, both treasurer and president?
I'm okay with that. Cool.
Agreed.
As long as we're making this, and so Carl, with the articles of incorporation and our officers and the motion that we're about to vote on, we'll take all 3 of those things to the bank and they'll let us open an account.
Do we need to get the funds remaining from the Alliance in a check so that we can make our initial deposit? I'm assuming we have to make an initial deposit.
That would make sense. I mean, I'm willing to make. So they have a $0 minimum balance for nonprofit checking accounts. So like, we can come up with an initial deposit even if we can't get it from the LCA right away.
Okay. And also, I want to, Tim, you've done a lot of legwork to get this set up. Make sure that you can get reimbursed for your costs in this process.
We've kept the receipts for all the filing fees and whatnot, and we'll in a future meeting we'll talk about our expense report process. This is the thrilling bit of starting an organization. So I'd like to open a bank account, a Stripe payment processing account, and a donor box account. Any objections to that, or can we unanimously agree that that's a great idea?
Hear, hear.
Yep.
I hear no objections.
No objections.
Now,
Do we, for order of business, need to have a first and a second on that too, or is that okay to just put through?
okay, so Andrew made the motion. Who would like to second it?
I will make the motion.
I'll second that.
There you go.
Okay. Last month, I had sent out the conflict of interest policy that we had put together. We need to approve that conflict of interest policy because that then goes along with the 1023 easy file. I think everybody has had a chance to read it. We had some questions on it. Would anybody care to make a motion to accept the conflict of interest policy?
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Okay. So entered in.
Before we take the vote, remind me what our obligations will be.
So basically, the obligation is once a year, all board members or anybody with any sort of fiscal responsibility within the organization just needs to fill out a form saying like other organizations that they are affiliated with within the city that might have interesting, kind of effects with the board. You can be in those organizations. You just need to kind of announce that you're in those organizations so that we can be educated when we are dealing with those organizations. So like if I hid from the board that I was on the cemetery board and I came to a Neighbors United meeting and was like, guys, we should like give some money to the cemetery. Like that is a clear conflict of interest and against our policy. But like, if you guys know that I'm involved with the cemetery, and you guys choose to like do something with the cemetery, I can recuse myself from that vote, leave the room. So that way, when like the vote comes back no, I won't know who to take my vengeance out upon.
All right. Thank you.
Swing your shovel at.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any objections, or do all approve?
Aye.
Aye.
And yeah, finally, like I will, I'll take all this and get the 1023 easy filed. And we should be well on our way at that point. Any other business that we should talk about this evening? Sorry, what was that?
Well, then I have a question about the conflict of interest forms.
Sure.
So I fill it out and I give it to.
You can send it. Well, so we have a new secretary. He was just voted in. So we should probably give those forms to Andrew.
Yeah, that'll be easiest.
And electronic is sufficient?
Is it sufficient? Yeah. It's weird. We just get to decide this. So if electronic is fine, then electronic is fine.
Because I lose paper all the time.
It sounds like electronic is the way to go then.
And my email address is on the company, is on the list, so just send it directly to my Gmail.
Cool.
Am I making that noise?
Might be the cat.
It could be.
It might be me.
Anything else we want to talk about tonight, guys? I know we're already running late. I appreciate everyone sticking around.
I think that we should probably say something that I think that everybody at this point likely already knows, which is that given the public health emergency, given that the city is not giving out street closure permits, I don't believe that we would be able to do a National Night Out event as we have done in previous years this year. And I think that's probably the right.
Yeah, I agree. That's the city said that like they're going to be very timid about issuing any permits, and if it happens, it'll be very, very late summer. So maybe we end up having a picnic at some point, but for now, it's just not going to happen. Do we want to set a date for our next meeting, or is it too soon to even talk about that since it's already 8:23, and you don't want to think about meetings again?
No, we can set it.
Do we have one on the schedule for July already?
I thought we were on till 8:30 anyways.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Well, then good.
I planned to 8:30.
Oh, well, you're stuck here for another 7 minutes then.
I don't see what.
Thursday, July 16th?
Oh.
Yeah, I have that on my calendar. 7 to 8.
7 to 8.
I guess I never did. Oops.
I wouldn't complain if it was moved to a different day. That is my daughter's birthday, but that's very selfish. There's 9 of us.
Yeah. You want to go to the 23rd?
I would not complain at all.
The 23rd would be more convenient for me too. Although I can do the 16th.
Okay, let's do it.
Thank you, everyone, for doing that.
Between now and then, hopefully we'll get this grant and we'll have our posts in the ground and we'll have all kinds of new ways to communicate with people.
Absolutely. Carl, thanks for all the legwork on getting AdVoz here too. That was very nice.
Yeah, hopefully, we can find a way to make use of that. Honestly, I hope the city could find a way to make use of it. It's a good service. The other thing I was thinking, to Tim, with you reaching out to Ebenezer, which is really, really good, and I think a fulfillment of where we started this year. We got together and said, hey, what do we want to do? Our head was in the right place. We all said, hey, we should spend more time talking to the entities that are already in the neighborhood, even if we're not exactly sure what to say. Because I think we started the year not really sure what to say. But it's worth just on some regular basis going out there and saying hello, what's going on, what do you need? And we'll hear things. So, Tim, do you want to talk about what you were thinking and handling that?
Yeah, so Carl and I were joking about how Ebenezer didn't know that we still existed. So we're kicking around the idea of like, let's get together a list of all of the kind of nonprofit service provider type organizations that are in and near our neighborhood. Get them all on a list, and let's start to schedule contacts with them so that like, let's make an initial contact and say, hey, you know, here we are. This is what we do. And let's just ask, like, you know, how are things going from your perspective? Is there anything that like you need? Not that we can necessarily be a service provider in all those cases, but hopefully we can be a connector. And then like, let's redo that contact every quarter. And basically like, let's split the list up and pick organizations you're comfortable with, and just make sure that we are being maximally helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that.
Carl, I think you said you were going to get a list started. I assume it'll be a Google Doc or something. And
Yeah, I'll put it in the drive.
cool. Last minute additions. Okay, it sounds like we've exhausted ourselves. Thank you everybody for joining tonight. Huh? What was that, Alex?
How are we going to burn 4 more minutes?
4 minutes of silence? I don't know. I mean, thank you everybody for joining. See you all on the email list, and maybe we'll get this resident participation stuff working better for the next internet meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. See you everybody.
Second.
All right.
Good night.
Bye.
Good seeing you guys.